I'm Jackie Schertz, and welcome to Hey Listen. Today's topic is deaf leaders. We have three guests with us today. Dr. Alan Hurwitz, who is involved with the National Advisory Group, Matthew Starr, Director of Mackay, which is a community service organization, and Sally Taylor, who's involved with the Deaf Women of Rochester. We have these three people with us today, so stay with us and we'll be right back. Welcome to Hey Listen. Our topic today is deaf leaders, and I'm very honored to have our special guests with us, Alan, Sally, and Matt. We've done a lot of discussion about deaf leaders, but before we go ahead, I'd really like for you to describe the various organizations that you're involved with. Alan, you're involved with the NAD, the National Association for the Deaf, and the NAG, National Advisory Group. Sally, you're leading a deaf advisory group now, and the Monroe County Association for the Hearing Impaired's director is Matthew here. So we'd like it if all of you could explain what you do, what your organization is involved with, and that type of thing. So I'd like to start with Alan.
Okay. The National Association of the Deaf, is known as in short as the NAD, was established back in the 1880s. The organization was established because at that time there was a world conference in Italy of teachers of the deaf. There was quite a discussion that happened at that meeting, and a resolution was passed that from then on, all schools for the deaf must use the oral method of communication and instruction, and that teachers must not use sign language within the classroom. And the deaf people in America heard about this and became very upset and decided at that point to establish an organization called the National Association of the Deaf to protect the rights of deaf people and of deaf children, and to provide advocacy to support better services for deaf people. And since that time, the National Association of the Deaf has been involved in a variety of different organizations and efforts to support deaf people. One, for example, was driving license. At one time, Congress was needed to support a bill that because deaf people couldn't hear, they couldn't drive. So we needed support from Congress to pass a law to remove that restriction on driving licenses so that deaf people could have licenses. The National Association of the Deaf has been involved in these sorts of efforts to prove that deaf people are safe drivers. And they've been involved in a variety of other advocacy activities to support the best interests of deaf people.
So I'd like to add that Alan is a past president of NAD. I believe that was in 1980 to 82.
That's correct.
Sally was one of the founding members of the Deaf Women of Rochester. That was in '81? Okay, and Matt Starr is currently program director for the Monroe County Association of the Hearing Impaired, also known as MCI. So Sally, why don't you tell us about Deaf Women of Rochester?
Okay, I will try to remember back in 1981. At that time, I felt that there was a feeling among women that we needed more recognition as individuals. If you recall, there were many women support groups established that on talk shows and so forth, supporting hearing women, fighting for what women needed, what women's rights. But deaf women started to realize that, deaf women need to learn about speaking out too and what their rights are. Where is our support? Can we do it? From that issue, I started to feel a little bit frustrated myself with my children, in my life, and I wanted to share that with other women, the problems that I had experienced. Maybe they had had similar problems, similar concerns. We found that we could learn a lot from each other. And I thought there were probably other women who felt similar ways. So slowly we formed the women's group, the Deaf Women's Group, and that's how it started in 1981.
Fine, thank you. And Matt, could you tell us about MCI?
Yes, a lot of people have problems saying MCI or M-C-A-H-I. We call it MCI. That started about 10 years ago, and you probably know it from the Highline Relay Service, which has really expanded a lot. That's one of the reasons we were able to convince New York State to assume the responsibility to run a telephone company. Well, not really a telephone company, a service similar to MCI's Highline Relay Service. Many people have recognized MCI and thought that it was a telephone company or provided only telephone services. Now that the telephone companies will assume that responsibility, MCI is going to become much more of a community service agency, providing services here within Rochester. Some of the primary duties will revolve around sharing information and making referrals. Related to telephone calls, a lot of people have been asking for a variety of information about deafness, calling us to find out where they can make referrals to get services for deaf people. The Rochester community is really unique in a lot of ways compared to a lot of other cities. Often, a city will have one central place to provide all services for the deaf. Employment services, counseling services. Here in Rochester, we don't have any really centralized agencies. There's a lot of individual, decentralized services available through different agencies. And I feel that's really a positive thing. It provides more opportunity for deaf people, more alternatives instead of getting all services from under one roof. For example, mental health services for the deaf here in Rochester is an important area, and MCI's role is trying to improve the networking for people, where we can correct perhaps some lapses in information or services. When MCI started, it focused exclusively on issues related to deafness. Now we're seeing much more focus on deaf people and hard of hearing people working together. And we're hoping to hire a staff member to focus exclusively on hard of hearing people.
Thank you. I'm interested in hearing what you feel are the major issues that will be coming before us in the next few years.
Well, in the beginning of the year and from then on, I see one major area that we need to keep our eyes on. That's known as the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA for short. This is a new piece of legislation that's being proposed in Congress. It should be proposed around January. The The reason this is viewed as an important piece of legislation is that this legislation provides for all people with disabilities a piece of civil rights legislation. It's actually a civil rights bill. There's been some confusion in the past. You know, we already have Section 504, which is a portion of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. But that code, Section 504, is specifically targeted to people and organizations that receive federal funds, and therefore they must be in compliance with federal law, and Section 504 provides for those guarantees. This provides for accessibility to disabled people. But this new law, the Americans with Disability Act, would have quite an impact on other agencies, not just those that are in the public sector that receive federal funds, but companies, private sector, industry, transportation, employment. Every place will be affected by this piece of civil rights legislation. And we'll need to keep our eyes on this piece of legislation as it passes through Congress next year.
I know that that's very important because in the past, agencies that did not receive federal funding said, the heck with that, I don't have to provide open, accessible services for the handicapped. I'm not required to by law. But now, as you point out, this act will provide for everyone.
I'd like to add to what Alan was saying, that when we receive complaints from people out in the community, one we often hear is that a variety of agencies or places providing clinical health services are not accessible. And because they sometimes don't receive federal funding, they're not a recipient under Section 504, they feel they don't have to provide those services, and often decisions are made that they don't qualify as having to provide those services.
That's a very good issue to keep in mind. Do you feel that there are other issues that we need to keep an eye on?
From a community level point of view, not necessarily the federal level, but when we talk about community health services, there will be a new law coming very soon. A hospital code where hospitals are required to have sign language interpreters available within a minimum amount of time. In some cases, 20 minutes, in other cases, 10 minutes. For example, the emergency room, you have to have an interpreter available within 10 minutes. It's a really tough law, and I think that'll have a lot of impact in the next year. I think hospitals initially will be at a loss for what to do, and I expect they'll be calling our agency for help. So in the beginning of the year, I'm sure that things will be a bit chaotic, but we're hoping to see that settle down to where services can be smoothly provided. That's a hot issue from a community point of view.
So what about for women, Sally?
I was thinking about what's happening now, and first I would like to start back in 1981. We had a lot of things to do. We met often. There were many workshops that we held, and we learned quite a bit from each other. We mostly focused on assertiveness. We started to get out and do more things as a result of that assertiveness. Our intent was to get out and learn more about what's going on outside in our lives. Right now we're dormant, actually. We don't want to see the organization die. We want to know what the next issue will be. If there's a particular issue that we do want to meet about, we will call a meeting. Last year we had a business meeting. We were so busy doing things out in the community, we didn't have time to have a business meeting. New issues are coming up this fall. We are beginning to get acquainted with each other again because there are new women in the community. We need to get together and get to know each other. And then from then on, we will see what we can do for next year.
I'm thinking now that with the protests that occurred at Gallaudet University, it may have affected your organizations in some way. Has there been any particular impact that you can see that has encouraged people to get more involved? tell you what, we need to take a break from our sponsors, so we'll be right back with that question. Hi. We can start up again with the question that we just brought up in the first part, and that was how the Gallaudet protest might have affected your organizations.
I can see what might happen with our organization is that women might think of what they can do. The protest might give them support, for example, for application for jobs or application for promotion in jobs. They will start thinking about what they can do to improve their status and ways that they can handle maybe seeking for better positions in the workplace. I can see that that might be something, a major issue that they can do themselves, we can do ourselves.
Matt?
How the Gallaudet protest might influence us is difficult to measure. But I'm starting to notice something. I've had a number of contacts with other agencies that also have small programs for the deaf within their agency. And in terms of those kinds of activities and networking, I think that more and more people are getting in touch, trying to work together on activities. And it wasn't like that before. But now whenever I go to a meeting or a discussion or bump into people, they're much more receptive, so I see a potential influence there.
How about you, Alan?
I believe that there has been some significant changes as a result of that protest in the attitudes of people in schools and educational programs. Since the Gallaudet protest, the Rochester School for the Deaf has undertaken some leadership in expanding the number of deaf members that they have on their board of directors. In the past they had 2, and now they have 5. And this is the largest number of any school board in the state of New York, the largest number of deaf people. They have more deaf members on the board than Gallaudet University has on their board. They only have 4 on the Gallaudet University board. They just recently passed a resolution to change that so that at least 51% of the membership on the board will be hearing impaired. And the members have been working hard towards achieving that goal. So I do see some direct impact as a result of the Gallaudet protest. At the National Association of the Deaf, they've been quite assertive in providing leadership to impact in a variety of leadership positions within the governmental system. One example is that recently, perhaps maybe you've heard about an old friend named Doc Norwood. He was the chief in the government, in one of the government systems in the area of education. He had retired approximately a year ago, and there was some talk in the community that that position would be filled by a hearing person. However, recently they did hire a deaf person to fill that position. So I would attribute that directly as a result from the Gallaudet protest. From the national level right down to the local community level, I think we're seeing the effects.
That's great. Thank you. Now we have a few questions that are coming up in the audience.
Yes, I'm curious as to what are the qualities of a good deaf leader?
I think
It's hard.
Oh, here, Sally?
the first thing that comes to my mind is enthusiasm and the desire to see something done about any issue. It takes enthusiasm to get people involved. That's a top quality deaf leader, enthusiasm.
Yes,
And Matt?
excitement. I want to add that some potential deaf leaders kind of feel they need to have some special skills or qualifications to become a good leader. And yes, it is very helpful to have some special management skills, knowledge of budgets, and knowing how to meet people, interact with people. But I feel an important factor that it definitely make a good leader is commitment. If you're very committed, then it doesn't really matter if you're lacking in some skills. You still can go ahead and learn as you're doing things. And that commitment's really important, getting involved. Apathy can really hurt badly, so keeping up the work, hard work.
I agree with the points that they've both raised, but I'd also like to discuss the parts of what makes a good deaf leader. One is the ability to work with people, an ability to motivate other people, because if one person is doing the entire work all by themselves, then the organization just isn't going to go very far. So you need the ability to attract other people and motivate other people to become involved with your cause in a variety of activities, and that's really an important component of leadership.
Thank you. So commitment, enthusiasm, and there are a lot of skills that are required, I see.
It seems to me I don't come from a culturally deaf background. I didn't go to residential school. I went to public schools until I attended NTID, so I'm not sure if I'm right or wrong on this. But those kinds of people who have attended residential schools for the deaf sometimes seem unable to do things on their own. Those residential schools may provide an environment where people are always there to help them. People do things for them. And once they've left school, I think those students tend not to really pick up on their own. I think people need to be given the right to do things on their own and encouraged to do things. They can't sit back and wait for other folks.
Okay, Sally, you seem to disagree with that.
Yes, I don't agree with that. I've seen plenty of people who have gone to residential schools do very well. As I get older, I see it more and more. Many of the deaf leaders I know are from schools for the deaf.
Okay. I think we have someone in the audience before who was talking about agencies and programs, talking about networks related to a variety of disabilities. And I'm wondering what you think about having this type of a deaf organization under an umbrella of a variety of disabled organizations.
My personal view of what is deafness is not, well, I don't think of it as a physical handicap. It's more like a communication handicap or communication barrier. So being in the mainstream with other disability groups, mobility impaired people, blind folks, is an obvious fit. But I'm afraid often we don't feel comfortable to do that because our problems are kind of different from the problems faced by those other groups. So being under an umbrella organization of groups with a whole variety of disabilities, I'm a little resistant to that.
So do you think other deaf people feel like that? I'm wondering what our audience members might feel, or
I'd like to
Alan?
respond to that. I think that it's important for us to find ways to work with other disability groups. We may have a lot in common. For example, if we're talking about accessibility to community-wide transportation or in housing or employment, a variety of community services, from that perspective, we do have a lot in common. And I feel very strongly that we need to have a place where we can work by ourselves and focus on our own issues and our relationships with deafness and what attributes are that impact us. But I think we also do need to find some way to deal with and work with disability group. You know, I agree with Matt, we do have a communication barrier. And we need to find some way to work with these groups and to educate these groups about the needs that deaf people present. And we need to learn about what needs disability groups have so that we might find common goals and be able to work together to achieve them related to housing, transportation, employment, and a variety of community services that are currently available.
So you think that the recent bill, the ADA bill, might help with that?
Yes, I believe it'll have quite an impact.
Okay, I think we have a comment in our audience now.
There are so many deaf organizations in the city of Rochester. I mean, there's the Monroe County Association for Hearing Impaired, and I'm wondering, amongst the other organizations, do you find a sense of apathy with so many groups that, you know, do you find a sense of apathy amongst deaf leaders?
So do you agree that there's apathy in our deaf community?
I don't know if you can call it apathy. If you see nothing happening, I'm not sure you can term that apathy. I mean, what's happening in the Rochester community, I mean, my God, we are miles ahead of many other communities in the United States. We have so many different services and organizations, activities, recreation activities. I mean, it's very healthy that we have such a variety of services to meet our needs. You know, and it's not just looking at one organization that would singly provide for everything that we need. I mean, at times it's easy for us to say, hey, it doesn't seem like anybody's involved and there's nothing really interesting happening. I'd like to say that that's really not true. We are involved in a variety of different activities across the community.
Matt?
I wish I could agree with you, Alan, but through my experiences in the community, as a participant in various organizations, there seems to be a problem of, well, for example, the officers of one particular organization are the exact same people who are talking about the difficulty in trying to get new people involved. So I see that happening at a number of organizations. Sure, there's a lot of things going on, many things happening, but I'm afraid it's the same people who've been running the show for a long time. And I think they're getting tired, and I'm not sure what's going to happen next.
So several things have been accomplished, and maybe people are now sitting back and resting on their laurels and not getting involved with other priorities. So, tell you what, we need to take a break now, and so please stay with us. back with Hey Listen for more discussion with our deaf leaders. We have a lot of people in our audience now who are very interested in asking some questions, so come on up.
Actually, mine is more of a comment related to what Matt's comments were. In regard to deaf people that come from a residential school, not being leaders of deaf community and saying that their character has been influenced by people caretaking for them for the rest of their life, for their life to this point, that bothers me. I mean, when you look at mainstream people, they depend on hearing people. I mean, you can see the same sort of dependence issues in both kinds of education. Motivation, the ability to work hard, and the ability to work with people are skills. Where do people develop those skills depends on who they're with and what their educational experience is. So that's just a statement. It's not really a question.
Okay.
I'd like to support what Ailey says. I agree with you, Ailey, fully. When Matt mentioned that, I was thinking to deaf people that have come from residential schools that have accomplished quite a bit. I mean, if you look at the bowling tournaments, the basketball tournaments, the volleyball tournaments, the national athletic activities that are hosted, I mean, 90% of those people come from residential environments. And I think that's proof that they make effective leaders.
Great. Okay, we have another comment.
I still want to add a comment to this. I don't know why you made that comment. I mean, is this something that you have against people from residential schools? In the mainstream environment, there are many deaf people that could never become leaders because there's just no opportunity in that environment to develop those skills. They're involved in the classroom almost as spectators. But in residential schools, it's quite an open environment. There's a lot of freedom. I feel more to be involved in leadership activities as a deaf person in a residential school rather than in a mainstream environment.
Okay. I believe we had several more comments.
I have a question about interpreters. I know interpreters are very expensive sometimes. Does that stop you from being able to meet with public officials and governmental agencies?
I'm not sure I understand your question. Could you repeat it?
Well, what I'm trying to say is that interpreter is expensive, and to hire one every time you'd like to meet with a public official trying to advocate for the deaf must be very expensive for you. So does that cost sometimes stop you from meeting with the people you want to meet with?
It is a very expensive service. There are many opportunities out in the community where people could get involved in town meetings, the PTA. There's always a problem trying to get interpreters. And I feel that the rates that interpreters earn now does create an expense, and that causes problems in many places that are small organizations or not-for-profit organizations. Another problem I faced also is that no one has control of the people who are running the meetings. Sometimes someone will be ill and they'll cancel a meeting or postpone. And even though that's canceled, you know, it might be less than with 24-hour notice, and you still have to pay the full cost of the interpreting services. I know one time I had a request for 2 meetings, one meeting in the morning, one in the afternoon. We had to cancel both meetings at the last moment, and the cost of interpreting services for those was $100. So even though the meetings never occurred, the cost was still a burden we had to bear.
I agree that it's an expensive proposition to have interpreters, but it does provide us an opportunity to educate the public about the need to provide an interpreter. I think of a situation several years ago where your profession of interpreting was just growing and there was a small number of interpreters. If I went to a place and asked for an interpreter, I mean, they'd say, well, we don't have the budget for it, and we're not prepared to pay for the cost of an interpreter. And now, since those experiences, I think there's been quite a bit of change. The agencies and the public groups in town have become much better educated about what is required in order to provide interpreter service. And I've been able to be comfortably involved with, I've been able to be involved with budget and be able to provide for that. I mean, it's a long process, but we need to work with the interpreters also to educate the general public about what the needs are to provide interpreting service, especially qualified interpreting service.
Thank you, Alan. Okay, we have another comment here.
I'm wondering, I'm thinking about the issue about deaf and hearing people getting along and working together, and we have those two groups, and there's quite often disagreement. I wonder how we could get deaf and hard of hearing groups to work better together. Do you have any examples or ideas about that?
Go ahead, Matt.
I think it's very important that representatives from the deaf or hearing impaired community make the effort to work in harmony with hearing people. Because obviously this is a hearing world. My experience in the past has been positive while working with some hearing people. Although I feel more needs to be done, but we've got a good start.
Okay, we have another question.
It's not in particular to you always, but there's always a need for leaders in the community. I'm wondering if you think if many people are listening to the leaders that we have today. Depends. I mean, you mentioned a topic. Being a leader isn't an easy task. A person has to work often alone, and the process of leadership really requires teamwork, and a good leader will put themselves in a position to help people realize that it's really their project, not just this one person's responsibility to carry out the task. Many people tend to take advantage of what people have earned for themselves in terms of work and what people have brought for themselves in terms of work. And I think that's a problem, and people need to be more involved.
Yeah, Matt, you wanted to add something?
Yes, the community here in Rochester is very interesting and I believe complex, because I feel there's many subgroups within the hearing impaired community. Groups of people who are very strongly culturally deaf. And then there's groups of people who prefer to communicate orally, and there's a whole variety of levels of educational attainment within the deaf community. And leaders need to be able to work well and fit with all of those people. If you focus on the hard of hearing community alone, people who are culturally deaf may feel neglected and causes some problems. So I think leaders really need to be sensitive to the needs of a whole variety of subgroups, subpopulations.
Yeah, it can be a real challenge. Sally?
I was thinking about that question, what Alan was saying. If leaders think for the good of other people and not only for themselves, it can make a big difference. We have to keep in mind that leaders can do, that they need to let people do what, let people know that they can benefit from whatever the issue is. But if people see that the leader is doing something only for themselves, they won't want to become involved.
You're right. Okay. We have another question over here.
Okay, this relates to particularly the part about this being a hearing world, to a concern that I have. Being that it is a hearing world and we have to work with that system, or the deaf people have to work within that system, it seems there may be a danger of being co-opted by that system. On the other hand, it's to the advantage to work within the system. I'm wondering, I'm thinking that when leaders align themselves with the status quo, if they've just aligned themselves with that which is oppressing their group to begin with. I'm wondering how you as leaders reconcile that dilemma.
Any responses? Yeah, that
That's a
requires
rather
quite a
deep
depth of
question,
analysis.
Philosophical question. I mean, I'm going to have to take some time to think about this carefully. This is something that being accepting of what is and the status quo and realizing the need for change is a struggle. I mean, we as leaders try to impact the community and come up with new ideas that will improve our situation. We require the support of a variety of different people to accomplish these objectives. It's a good idea, and I do wish to share with other people these ideas and influence their feelings and ideas, that we do have some real problems and that we need to do something about them. But it's not something that can just happen overnight. So in some ways it's an educational process, and it requires work over the long haul, maybe perhaps years, in order to affect change. And I'm not sure that I've really responded to your question, but your point is really quite a deep philosophical point requiring actual dialogue. A good question.
Okay, Matt, you wanted to add?
Yes, leadership is also a learning process. And you have to have a lot of dialogue with a lot of different people to learn to truly understand the situation clearly.
Okay, fine, thank you.
I'd like to talk about people listening to their leaders and whether or not that's an issue. As I look back to my experience as the president of the NTID Student Congress, that was the student government group at NTID, the National Technical Institute for the Deaf. In addition to my leadership responsibilities, there was quite a leadership characteristics that one of them was that you just had to be a really strong, tough person, and you just had to keep
Right.
punching away at the same problems. You know, even though there was a whole lot of teamwork, there was also issues about people backstabbing one another and not, you know, saying, well, that's not such a great leader, and the cohesiveness of the group wasn't really strong, and it required the leaders to have quite a lot of guts just to persevere.
Yeah, that brings to mind Marley Matlin. She's had to have a lot of guts and a lot of determination to deal with a lot of things that have come her way. Oh, tell you what, we need to take a break for a message from our sponsors. We'll be right back, and we'll catch up with questions then. Okay, we're back for more discussion from our deaf leaders. And we'd like to start off with a question.
This a comment and then a question at the end. My comment relates to my observation that leaders of an organization tend to be in a certain group, actually sort of cliques of people, and that there's a lot of backstabbing amongst different groups saying, well, no, that group's hard of hearing, and their goals really don't fit with the goals of our organization. And there's a lot of splitting of efforts. And I'm wondering if there could be some more efforts to respect one another's work and to find ways to work together and to collaborate in order to increase the strength of our community. My question is, how do we influence these groups to stop their competitiveness and sort of this petty bickering about which group is better in order to get them to work together towards common goals. What do we need to make that happen?
Any responses?
I think that we are going through growing pains at this time. If we look back over the past few years, we've made some rapid changes within a short period of time in the Rochester community. Many services have been established, and when you step back and look at what's occurring, you see that there's so many good services, but that many of these services aren't communicating with one another. There seems to be no mechanism for effective referral and information. Some sort of system that would allow for organizations and agencies and services to work together and to find the common goals that they already share. How to establish such an organization, I'm really not sure. It's not a simple task. We need to establish perhaps some kind of council concept, some kind of effort that would not tend to threaten the groups, or, to give the sense that one organization is sort of taking over the whole pie or taking over the whole position. Some sort of setup where all the different organizations can come together and feel they're on an equal standing with one another. It should be some sort of organization that would allow for the sharing of ideas and to learn more about the other organizations, to network with them, and over time develop support networks. And we have to have some sort of maybe umbrella organization to have an umbrella organization with a board of directors is perhaps something we could have established a long time ago, but not now. The organizations and agencies and services that are set up would not now give up their identity that they've established, and they've worked hard on that. But we do need to find ways to work together without destroying the individual identities that have been established.
That's a great answer. Thank you. Okay, I think we have a comment over here.
Dr. Hurwitz, I agree completely with your last statement. As a son of deaf parents and in the field of deafness, I tend to see things happen such as organizations growing and getting to the point where nothing happens after a long period of time. But as you mentioned earlier, the athletic clubs that are involving these deaf individuals in activities seem to be a lot stronger, and they continue for a long period of time. But other committees, advocacy groups that deal with the hearing community, they start, they grow, and then they sort of fade away. And I think a lot of the work is put on the chairperson, and it makes it real difficult to get the feedback from the community. My question to you and the other panel members is, are these organizations meeting together as a group and talking about the concerns and exchanging ideas and establishing a mutual concern to address the hearing community?
It has happened, but probably on more of an ad hoc basis. We don't have something that's an ongoing network organization. I think over time, perhaps these organizations or agencies working together will develop this. It's not something that I want to spend a lot of time on because we're already so busy with other issues, but there are good reasons for setting up this kind of a council.
Okay, I'm thinking about what's happening now compared to what happened long ago. Long ago, people did not have TTYs, they didn't have telecaptioning devices for their TVs. Things are totally different now.
Yes. I'm old enough to have been caught in those changes. Things like the deaf community without the teletype is something I'm aware of, and captioning also. Deaf people used to often go to deaf clubs to keep in touch. Now there's no body, there's no club to go to. People are not going to clubs as often. Before they were. People are not attending deaf clubs as much as they used to.
You're right. I think we have some other questions in the audience now.
is it true that most deaf leaders have good speech? I don't think I want to respond to this question. I note that speech abilities are a quality that are not necessarily a quality that would make a good leader. I mean, if you have good speech skills or good voicing skills, that I think that there's more important qualities. I mean, what you have to say is more important than actually how you're going to say it. The communication skills are important related to content. You can use support services such as interpreters or TDDs in order to contact people and carry on communication with them. And there are ways to make people feel at ease with those sorts of services. Speech, the ability to speak well, use your voice, is not necessarily a character of good leadership.
Okay, if we're not talking about speech per se, maybe it helps to look at language. That's a question. I know that people with very limited language skills can be good leaders. The question is, suppose a person has very limited language skills. They don't use extremely sophisticated language, whether spoken or written. I think what's basic is, can they follow what's going on and communicate?
I agree with you, Matt. Okay.
I have two questions that I'd like to ask. It's going to be hard for me to keep them separate. My first question relates to the point that Arden brought up, and agreeing with him, that the athletic and basketball, golf, bowling, all the different organizations where people get together, they raise money, and they do quite well. For years, they've been established and are quite strong. Those efforts, in comparison with the political efforts and advocacy efforts, are weak. I mean, we need more participation there. But these athletic things grow. I mean, I wonder if it's because people enjoy these things. They have the opportunity to chat with one another and share news. And with politics, it's complex and deep, and I'm not so sure they want to be involved with that. I wonder if that's your opinion. Now, that's my first question. My second question is, you talked about the characteristics of a good leader. And many of them sound great. But we here in the Rochester community, especially adults in this community, not so much the students or the young folks, the children, you know, there's a youth leadership camp for young folks out in Minnesota, and there's the junior NAD and the camp that they have for kids, and a variety of other different things. NTID has a special retreat weekend for leaders. I'm wondering where adults can go to get leadership training. I wouldn't mind being involved in some things like that, and I'd like to know how I could get involved with that. Do you have any ideas where I could find such a service?
Okay, I believe Matt wants to respond there.
Mackay is one program of the Health Association. Now, the Health Association, the parent agency, has the same concern related to the Hispanic community. Leadership skills and leadership training seems to be a good program to set up among Hispanic adults. And they've asked Mackay, why don't we set up something like that, leadership training at the community level for hearing impaired adults? So I think that might be a really good fit with what our audience member was talking about.
That's a great idea. We're talking about the issue of why deaf people are more likely to be involved with athletic events or other things related to other related activities to athletics and politics and other things in comparison. Look at the hearing population. I mean, I would not say that a large percentage of hearing people are totally involved with politics. I mean, a variety of people have a variety of interests. Some are involved in church organizations or community activities in other ways. So I think it's very similar. When we talk about the idea of leadership training for deaf adults, the National Association of the Deaf does have what they call a Deaf Leader Training Program. This is an annual event, so if you are interested in becoming involved with that, you may wish to contact the National Association of the Deaf through their state affiliate here, the Empire State Association of the Deaf, ESAD. every year they send approximately 4 people to this Deaf Adults National Leadership Conference and Training Program. And they send them to also a regional training, which I believe is 3 days long. And then after that program, there's a certain number of people are selected to then go to Gallaudet University for a week-long training experience. And I'd be happy to provide you with more details about that later.
Yeah, Matt?
When you talk about training programs at the national level, I see that, and it might be a little threatening or overwhelming. Because if you're talking about a person with a limited background in that area, getting involved immediately on the national level, it might be really overwhelming. It might be wise to build in steps.
That's true. The NAD has worked with several state organizations and state associations and clubs in order to establish this leadership training program.
Well, thank you very much. We need to take a break now. I wish we had time for more questions, but I've really enjoyed the discussion that we've had with our deaf leaders. So we'll be back, and stay tuned. Welcome back again. We've been talking about deaf leaders for this program, and it seems we need to work more with our deaf leaders and influence other people to get involved and lead us. I'd like to thank Alan, Sally, and Matt for participating today. I really appreciated it. And our audience contributed wonderful questions. We look forward to more shows, and thank you for coming.